Hello and happy Thanksgiving from everyone here at Rising. Brianna and I will be back to bring you the latest news next week. In the meantime, enjoy this flashback from earlier this year. Jill Stein is running for president once again, announcing last Thursday that she would seek the Green Party nomination for the second time.
Stein's entry into the race has rattled some Democratic operatives who still blame her for Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016. Stein joins a bevy of candidates targeting President Joe Biden from the left and center, including RFK Jr., Marianne Williamson, Cornell West, Dean Phillips, and Cenk Uygur. Here to discuss why she thinks she would be a better presidential candidate than the alternatives and her thoughts on third-party candidates more broadly is Dr. Jill Stein. Welcome to the show.
Really great to be with you both. Thanks.
Getting in a commercial for your own podcast there. I'm not going to let you get off with that.
I know I've talked to Dr. Stein so many times on bad faith that I had a brain fart. Welcome to Rising. Start by answer this question. There are a lot more left candidates in the race than we typically have, and obviously many people thought they would be voting for Cornell West as the Green Party candidate until recently. Now they're going to be presented with this choice between, I think, two really principled leftists, Cornell West running as an independent and yourself as the Green Party candidate. How should people decide?
Well, that is the question of the hour. Will the candidates be on the ballot? And part of what compelled me to jump into the race was in order to ensure that we will have a fervently pro-worker, anti-war, climate emergency agenda that's front and center in this election, and which is on the ballot across the nation. And as you may know, it's no simple matter to get on the ballot. We've done that before. And in the last race in 2016, my campaign was on the ballot for 95% of voters in 47 states and the District of Columbia. And so, I really felt, having done this work for so many years, to ensure that the voices of everyday people have a fighting chance in this election and that we have ballot access. If you don't have ballot access, you may have a very powerful message, but you're not actually contesting for power and you're not holding empire and oligarchy to account. So fundamentally, that's why I'm in the race, to ensure that we are there and on the ballot. So at the end of the day, my suspicion is that there are going to be very few candidates that are pro-worker, anti-war, and climate emergency oriented who are offering a choice on the ballot.
So then do you think it was a strategic mistake for Dr. West to choose to leave the Green Party and run as an independent?
So I don't want to question his motives and his strategy. I think he does what's right for himself, and he has a huge contribution that he's already made and that he will continue to make. I think his courageous, powerful voice is very important in the election, and I'm really grateful that he is there, and I hope he stays in it as long as possible. But he basically gave up $4 million worth of ballot lines, and I did not want to see them go to waste, which is why I jumped in. We have another $1 million to go, but we're about 80% of the way there in terms of the cost of this battle. So, it's going to be very challenging for him to actually put his campaign on the ballot.
Right, and that's not an endorsement. It's just reality that it is so difficult. It's difficult to run outside of the two-party duopoly. I'm a supporter of the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. It's difficult for them, and then it's even more difficult to run without the access that those parties do in the states to actually be voted for. I wanted to get your reaction to, we're hearing again a lot of what we heard in 2016 after Hillary Clinton's defeat about what they said about you then. It was all your fault. We're hearing that again about these third-party challengers. There was a lot of noise about RFK Jr. Now that he's actually not in the Democratic primaries, I think there's a perhaps accurate perception that he might actually hurt Trump more than Biden, so there's not as much noise about that. But a lot of noise about Cornell West and you, presuming you become the Green Party nominee. How do you respond to these ostensibly pro-democracy pundits, commentators who say that giving the people more choices is somehow bad for democracy?
Well, I think you've said it right there. It's utterly ludicrous, preposterous, and laughable that those who purport to be advocating for democracy are saying that people shouldn't have choices. People are clamoring for choices. We know that 75%, more than that, actually say that we are headed in the wrong direction under our current, powers that be. Over 60% of voters are saying that the two parties have failed us and that we need a party that actually serves the people. So, where do you come off even suggesting that it's good for democracy to limit people's choices? It's very important that voters have choice in order for our vote to be meaningful, and that elections be an exercise in freedom of choice. If they're not, it's just not a democracy. And can I add that this presumption that your vote as a voter, that Democrats own your vote, or Republicans for that matter, the idea that anyone owns your vote is preposterous. Candidates have to earn your vote. No one owns your vote. And the fact that the Democrats are trying to, beat this dead horse, again, speaks volumes about where they're coming from, how out of touch they are. What drove voters away from the Democratic Party? Look at what was effectively the mother of all spoiled elections. That was 2010. What happened in 2010? Democrats lost 1,000 state rep seats. They lost 64 congressional seats, I believe 12 Senate seats, and 13 governor seats. That really spoiled their grip on power. There were no third parties to blame that on. What happened? What happened was that the Democrats threw working people under the bus in the years prior with the crash of 2008 and the bailout of Wall Street, and millions of families were thrown out of their homes. So, that's what's driving political trends here. And for the Democrats to try to blame that on candidates and parties like the one I represent is ludicrous, because we're actually providing the solutions to what's driving people, running and screaming from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, hilariously, I don't know if you saw this, but a few days ago, Jennifer Rubin was on MSNBC, and she blamed you for something new. She blamed you. She said, but for you, Al Gore would have been president back in 2000. She obviously got her numbers crossed, but it does, I think, speak to people's real urge to throw your name around when they're making excuses for the Democratic Party's own failures. I did want to ask you about some issues that are important.
And can I just
also
throw in, I think we sort of caught them off guard. They didn't expect this. So now they're just trying to recycle all the smears that they used in my prior two races. And those smears are really out of steam. They've been proven absolutely false and ridiculous. So they're kind of left defenseless, and they have no one to blame but themselves.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah.
sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask you, I do think a lot of the interest of our audience, a lot of the attention on someone like RFK Jr. and even Vivek Ramaswamy is because there is a, I think, populist-rooted interest in protecting speech rights, to oppose what are perceived as authoritarian policies with respect to COVID, for instance, and that candidates that have been, I think, anti-establishment on those issues have found a lot of space in the political sphere. And I do wonder what your and the Green Party's stance is on those kinds of issues. I believe the Green Party, because of its association with environmental interests and rights, can sometimes be framed as a kind of big government nanny state sort of a party. So I wanted to get you on the record talking about what you make of the public interest in candidates like RFK Jr., who have, at least up until the conflict in Gaza, been stridently anti-war, talked a lot about free speech issues, been very concerned about censorship on the internet, even including with respect to COVID-related censorship and the like.
Yeah, I take all those concerns very seriously. And, when we present our campaign, we talk about, 3 or 4 really central crises. So we have crushing inequality, endless war, climate collapse, and really a crisis of democracy. And that crisis democracy is really present all across the board. And in particular, it is an assault on our constitutional rights. And whether you look at the the proliferation of very dangerous censorship, the assault on our rights of protest, the attack on environmental protesters, for example, in Cop City, who are being really prosecuted as terrorists, the assault on our privacy rights. I think this is absolutely fundamental and foundational. And the Democratic and Republican parties both are perpetrating this assault on our civil liberties, our civil rights, and really the very foundations of democracy. Many of the crises that we're facing right now, I think, can be very directly connected to this complete, I don't want to just say loss of faith, but it's a complete cynicism and just annoyance, this fury and resentment at the institutions of government. If you look at polls now, we're at rock bottom in confidence in really virtually all of the institutions of government, whether it's judicial, legislative, the presidency, the mainstream media, you name it, we're at rock bottom. And in our Declaration of Independence, it states that all just power derives from consent of the governed, and the governed do not consent. So I think that solving all of our problems, it can't be done unless we're also addressing this absolute assault on our institutions of democracy.
Can you quickly address what you think the U.S. policy should be toward the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the Israel-Gaza-Palestine conflict, given that that's foreign policy looms so large in the news right now?
Absolutely. And, I think both of these wars were avoidable and are the outcome of extremely destructive, misguided policy on the part of the U.S. and its allies for many years. Whether you're looking at the expansion of NATO, that really was predicted by virtually everyone across the political spectrum to be pushing Russia into a war. Consider if we had nuclear-capable missiles on our border, we would not be sitting pretty. And so Russia is doing what's horrific and to be condemned. And I have condemned it. But on the other hand, this was a very provoked war, and it could have been stopped. And it, as well as, it could have been resolved very early on. We know there was an effort on the part of Turkey to create a peace process, which was actually going well until the U.S. and the U.K. disrupted it. And likewise, in Israel and Gaza, it's, Israel has been in flagrant violation of international law with the apartheid and ethnic cleansing that's been going on for decades. And the U.S. has given it a blank check, both in terms of providing, I think it's like $160 billion more than we have provided in military aid to any country, and also providing diplomatic cover. So, what we're asking for here is not rocket science. We're asking for compliance with international law and human rights on the part of all parties. And we have to do this in a hurry. Not only that, millions of lives are at stake, and that's especially evident right now in Gaza, where mothers, babies, and elders are about 2/3 of this 11,000 people who've been brutally slaughtered at this point, where ethnic cleansing is being practiced. These pauses are basically just to move people out. For the most part, they might be bringing in a trickle of supplies, but they're basically to implement the plan of ethnic cleansing, where collective punishment is being practiced, where news organizations and international media offices are being targeted, and hospitals and healthcare centers. It's just, horrifying what's going on. But it's not just the people of Gaza who are at risk. Israel is at risk because it is making itself a pariah among nations, and in particular among its neighbors who are armed and who are, fleeing their carefully developed, much hard-won relations with Israel right now. Things are just going to hell in a handbasket. So it's not just for the Palestinians whose rights are being just completely bulldozed and have been for decades. But it's also the long-term concerns of Israel. I have many ties to Israel. My background is Jewish, and I grew up going to Sunday school every Sunday as a Reformed Jew. My grandparents came to this country fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe. My grandfather's name is Israel. So, I have family ties, strong family ties to Israel here. And I don't want to see Israel go up in flames any more than anyone else, but what's going on now is absolutely a disaster for all parties. And it's really important that I think we invoke our higher selves and step up to what international law and human rights requires of us. This isn't rocket science, but you're not going to see the right thing happen when Congress is in the pocket of AIPAC and the war industry, who are the real beneficiaries. And if I could say one more thing, the fact that we changed the channel from Ukraine, which was like the most important thing that warranted 115 billion and counting in our resources, while child poverty doubled, while 1 out of every 4 Americans doesn't have enough food. The fact that Ukraine and funding the military needs of Ukraine in particular was the most important thing, bar none. Forget about the survival and health and welfare of the American people. That was the most important thing until suddenly we had a shiny new war. And now the whole war industry and the war profiteers are perfectly happy with this new one. So who exactly is driving this show? This is impoverishing us as Americans. It's also endangering us. Consider that there's a nuclear submarine now sitting off the coast of Gaza. What's in a nuclear submarine? Well, my understanding is that nuclear submarines generally hold nuclear weapons. And in fact, an Ohio-class nuclear sub, which is the one that's out there, holds 4,000 Hiroshima bombs, the equivalent. It doesn't hold 4,000 bombs, but it holds the equivalent of 4,000 Hiroshimas. Some people may say, oh, well, no worries. That's over there. We're over here. But unfortunately, that's not the case. That's not how this quantity of firepower works. There's enough firepower on that nuclear submarine basically to cause nuclear winter, which happens when you kick up a whole lot of dust into the atmosphere. It dims the sunlight right away. And basically agricultural production takes a nosedive. So what would 400 bombs worth? And I'm not saying that's the likely scenario, but it is a possible scenario. And it makes the point here that we too are in the target hairs, because that is enough firepower to basically starve 1 out of every 3 people on the planet. That is a huge hit of nuclear winter, which basically spells the end of human civilization. So we cannot go to war in this day and age, and we cannot risk war without understanding that we are in the target hairs. And I think that fundamentally changes how people will see that when they understand both the risks of war as well as the costs of war.
Well, Dr. Stein, we're unfortunately out of time, but we'd love to have you back on again to further discuss your platform. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.